The pen feels heavy in my hand. Heavier than a pen should feel. It's a fountain pen, one Mark gave me for our 10th anniversary. An expensive, onyx-black Montblanc he said was for signing deals that change the world. I suppose, in a way, that's exactly what I'm doing. The cardstock is thick, creamy, with an embossed floral pattern around the edges. On the front, in swirling gold cursive, is a single word: congratulations. It's the kind of card you give for a wedding, a new baby, a graduation. A celebration of a bright new future. My future feels anything but bright. It feels sharp and cold and meticulously planned. I press the nib to the paper. The ink flows, a dark, final black. My hand doesn't shake. I thought it would, but it's as steady as a surgeon's. There's no rage left, not the hot, screaming kind anyway. All of that burned out weeks ago, leaving behind something harder, something crystalline and calm. What I feel now is the quiet hum of an engine that has just been switched on. A powerful, patient machine designed for a single purpose. I finish the note, the words simple, almost polite. Then, I slide another document into the envelope behind the card. It's not a sentimental photo or a heartfelt letter. It's a 150-page summary of a lawsuit. A detailed, footnoted, evidence-backed story of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. I seal the envelope. The silence in my cavernous, empty house is absolute. It's the kind of silence that has a weight to it, pressing down on my shoulders. I can almost hear the ticking of a clock that isn't there, counting down the seconds until impact. The ink is still wet on the page. If you've ever felt the cold chill of a decision that changes everything, that moment where you cross a line and know you can never go back, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this is the first time you're hearing my voice, please subscribe. Your presence here helps me piece these stories together, more than you could ever know. It wasn't always like this. Silence, I mean. This house used to be filled with noise. The comfortable, lived-in noise of a 20-year partnership. The murmur of the television in the evening, the clinking of wine glasses, the low thrum of Mark's voice on a business call from his home office. We were a team. Not just a husband and wife, but partners in the truest sense. We built everything from nothing. Vance and Sterling architecture wasn't just a name on a building. It was our entire world, forged in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment over pizza and cheap red wine. I was Sterling. The foundation, the numbers, the logistics, the quiet, unseen work that turned his brilliant, chaotic sketches into real, solid buildings that touched the sky. He was Vance. The face, the charisma, the visionary who could sell a dream to a client with a wave of his hand and a dazzling smile. He drew the beautiful lines. I made sure the building wouldn't fall down. For 20 years, it worked. We were a perfect symbiosis. Our life was a reflection of our work, elegant, well-constructed, and admired by everyone who saw it. We had the house in the suburbs with the wraparound porch, the 2 German shepherds, the annual trips to Tuscany. From the outside, we were the blueprint of success. But blueprints are just paper. They don't show the hairline cracks that form in the foundation over time, the slow, insidious erosion that happens when no one is paying attention. The cracks started small. So small I explained them away. He started staying late at the office, but he was always a workaholic. Big new project, he'd say, kissing my forehead, his breath smelling of expensive whiskey. He only drank with clients. He bought a new sports car, a ridiculous cherry red convertible that was completely impractical. A bit of a midlife crisis, he laughed, ruffling my hair. Just having some fun, I laughed with him. I wanted to be the cool wife, the understanding partner, not the nagging shrew who clipped her husband's wings. He started guarding his phone like it held state secrets, angling the screen away from me when a text came in. Just the guys from the club, he'd mutter, his thumbs flying across the screen. I chose to believe him. I chose to believe in the life we had built, in the man I had loved for 2 decades. Choosing to see the truth would have meant admitting that the entire structure of my world was fundamentally unsound. And I, Eleanor Sterling, the woman who checked every support beam and triple-checked every calculation, couldn't face that. I couldn't admit that the building I was living in was about to collapse. The inciting incident, the earthquake that finally brought it all down, wasn't a dramatic, screaming confrontation. It was a piece of paper. An American Express statement left carelessly on the kitchen counter. I was sorting the mail, a mundane Tuesday morning ritual. And there it was, nestled between a catalog for garden supplies and a bill for our property taxes. A charge for $400. For a bouquet of flowers. From a boutique florist I'd never heard of. I knew it wasn't for me. My birthday had passed 2 months earlier, and our anniversary wasn't for another 3. Mark wasn't the kind of man who bought flowers just because, not anymore. Below it, another charge. A hotel. The kind of sleek, impersonal downtown hotel people use for business trips or for things they don't want to bring home. The charge was for a deluxe suite, a cold knot formed in my stomach. I looked at the date. It was from a Thursday 2 weeks prior. A night he told me he was stuck at the office, working late with the team to meet a deadline. I remember I'd left a plate of dinner for him in the oven. It was still there, untouched, the next morning. I confronted him that night, not with anger, but with a quiet, hollow feeling. I held the statement in my hand. It felt flimsy, like a prop in a play I didn't know I was acting in. He didn't even try to lie. He just sighed, a long, weary sound, as if I were the one burdening him. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled salt and pepper hair. "Look, Ellie," he began, using the nickname he only used when he was trying to soften a blow. "It's complicated," and then he told me. He told me about Chloe, an intern, 24 years old, fresh out of design school. He said all the things I imagine cheating husbands say. "It doesn't mean anything. You and I, what we have is real, she's just a distraction." And then, the phrase that would become his mantra, his all-encompassing excuse for tearing our world apart. "I'm having a midlife crisis, honey. That's all this is. A stupid, cliché midlife crisis. It'll pass," he said it so calmly, so rationally, as if he were diagnosing a common cold. He wasn't apologizing for the betrayal. He was explaining it away, packaging it as a predictable, manageable symptom of middle age, like buying a sports car or taking up skydiving. He made it sound like my job was to be patient, to wait for the fever to break, to be the stable, understanding wife who would still be there when his little phase was over. And the most pathetic part? For a while, I actually believed him. My first instinct was to fix it. That's what I do. I see a problem, a structural weakness, and I fix it. I scheduled marriage counseling. Mark agreed, with the enthusiasm of a man heading to a root canal. We sat in a beige office that smelled faintly of lavender and desperation, on a couch that was too soft. I talked. I cried. I used words like betrayal and rebuilding trust. Mark just sat there, nodding, looking at his watch. He spoke in therapy-approved platitudes. "I understand your pain. I'm committed to the process. I know I have work to do," but his eyes were vacant. He was a million miles away. He was there in body, but his soul, his energy, was already somewhere else. With her. He'd come home from these sessions, give me a perfunctory hug, and then disappear into his office, the door clicking shut behind him. I'd hear the muffled tones of his voice on the phone late into the night, and I knew he was still talking to her. I tried to be the wife he wanted, the one who could compete with a 24-year-old. I started working out more. I bought new clothes, lingerie that felt foreign and ridiculous on my skin. I suggested we take a trip, just the two of us, to one of our old favorite spots in Italy. "I'm just too swamped at work right now, Ellie," he said, not even looking up from his laptop. "Maybe next year." Every attempt I made to bridge the chasm between us felt like throwing stones into the Grand Canyon. They just disappeared, making no sound, no impact. I was fighting for a marriage he had already abandoned. I felt myself shrinking, becoming a caricature of a desperate housewife. I started doing something I never thought I would. I became a spy in my own life. I'd check his phone when he was in the shower, my heart pounding with a mixture of shame and dread. I'd scroll through his texts, his call logs, each message a tiny paper cut on my soul. Her name, Chloe, was everywhere. Little hearts, inside jokes, plans for secret lunches. I even stooped to looking at her social media. Her profile was public, a curated gallery of a perfect, exciting life. Endless photos of her at trendy restaurants I knew she couldn't afford on an intern salary. Pictures of her with a new designer handbag, captioned, "Best surprise ever." A weekend trip to a Napa vineyard. The same weekend Mark told me he was on a boys' golfing trip. I wasn't just looking at evidence of an affair. I was looking at receipts. My receipts. Our money. The money I managed. The money I meticulously budgeted for our future was being funneled into creating this fantasy life for his mistress. The midlife crisis was getting expensive. The financial bleed started to show at the office. It was no longer just his personal credit card, it was the company's. Mark, who had always deferred to my judgment on financial matters, started making unilateral decisions. He greenlit a vanity project, ridiculously over-the-top design for a boutique hotel that had no chance of being profitable. The budget was astronomical. When I questioned him, presenting him with spreadsheets and projections that clearly showed it was a financial black hole, he waved me away. "You need to think bigger, Eleanor. Stop being so conservative. This is the kind of project that puts us on the map," but I knew what it was. It was for her. Chloe was assigned to the project, her first big lead. He was building her a monument with our money. He was trying to impress her, to play the role of the powerful, visionary architect, the master of the universe. Suppliers started calling me directly, something that had never happened before. "Eleanor, the invoice for the Italian marble is 90 days past due. Eleanor, we can't release the next shipment of steel until we receive payment." I'd go into the accounting system, a system I designed and managed for 2 decades, and find myself locked out. "Password has been changed." I confronted Mark, my voice shaking with a fury I could no longer contain. "What is going on with the accounts, Mark? Why are our suppliers not being paid?" He looked at me with cold indifference. "I'm handling it. You're too emotional right now to be dealing with the company's finances. You should take some time off." "Relax." He was gaslighting me, painting me as the hysterical wife whose personal problems were affecting her professional judgment. He was systematically cutting me out of our own company, the company that bore my name, the company whose financial stability was entirely my creation. The man I had built an empire with was now treating me like an incompetent secretary. The rising challenges were no longer just emotional, they were a full-scale corporate takeover happening right under my nose. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was erasing me. The shift happened on a Tuesday night. I remember it was raining, a cold, miserable November drizzle that matched the mood inside me. Mark was working late again. I knew he was with her. The house was silent except for the drumming of the rain against the window panes. I had driven to the office. I don't even know why. A desperate, primal need to connect with the one part of my life that still felt like mine. Or what was left of it. I used my key, but my access code for the main server room blinked red. Access denied. He had locked me out of the heart of our own company. I stood there in the dark, silent hallway, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. And I felt that old, familiar fire. Not the hot burn of anger, but the cold, focused flame of determination. The fire that had fueled me through all-nighters in college, through the lean early years of our business. He thought he could outsmart me. He thought because I handled the numbers I didn't understand the system. But I didn't just handle the numbers. I built the damn system. I went to my old office. It felt strange, like a museum of a life I used to live. My pictures were still on the desk, but there was a fine layer of dust on them. I booted up my old desktop computer, the one I hadn't used in years. I knew there was a backdoor. A master administrator override I had coded into the network's foundation years ago, a failsafe in case of a catastrophic system failure. I always believed in having a contingency plan. My fingers flew across the keyboard, muscle memory taking over. The screen flickered and then I was in. I had access to everything. The main server, the accounting software, his personal drive. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I started digging. And what I found was so much worse than a simple affair funded by the company account. It was a conspiracy. a meticulously planned campaign of financial destruction. He had been systematically devaluing Vance and Sterling, canceling profitable contracts, overspending on losing projects, running up massive debts with our suppliers. At the same time, he had been funneling money, millions of dollars, through a series of complex wire transfers into a separate entity, a shell corporation I had never heard of. Vance Innovative Design Group. The incorporation documents were right there, in a folder labeled New Beginnings, the sole director and shareholder, Mark Vance. But it was the business plan that made my blood run cold. His plan was to drive Vance and Sterling into the ground, declare bankruptcy, and let it fold. All the debt, all the lawsuits from unpaid suppliers and broken contracts would be attached to that worthless entity. He would then emerge from the ashes with his new company, debt-free, with a hefty war chest of stolen capital, and a new lead designer. Chloe's name was on the prospectus. She was listed as a founding partner. This wasn't a midlife crisis. This was a coup. A premeditated, calculated betrayal designed to leave me with nothing but the ruins of our shared life, while he and his 24-year-old in turn walked away with the crown jewels. The sadness I had been drowning in for months evaporated, replaced by something arctic and diamond-hard. He hadn't just broken my heart. He had declared war. And he had forgotten one crucial thing. He may have been the visionary, but I was the strategist. And you never, ever underestimate your opponent. The weeks that followed were the loneliest of my life. I moved into the guest room. We lived like ghosts in the same house, the air thick with unspoken truths. He was brazen now, no longer bothering to hide his late nights or his constant texting. He was just waiting for the final collapse, for the moment he could walk away from the wreckage he'd created and play the victim, the wronged husband whose wife just couldn't handle the pressure. Our friends, the ones we'd had for years, rallied around him. He spun them a masterful story. Eleanor's just not herself lately. The stress of the business is getting to her. She's become so negative, so controlling, they'd call me, their voices dripping with pity. Just give him some space, Eleanor. He loves you. He's just going through a phase. They saw a man buckling under pressure. They couldn't see the saboteur. The bank sent a notice of default for our business loan. A foreclosure notice was taped to the front door of our beautiful home. The company, our life's work, was hemorrhaging money, bleeding out from 1,000 self-inflicted wounds. He was killing it, and everyone was blaming me for not being a more supportive wife. One night, I saw a post on Chloe's Instagram. A picture of her and Mark, beaming, clinking champagne glasses on the balcony of a lavish new apartment downtown. The caption read, "To our new home and our new life. So excited for what's next with my king, my king." He had bought them a new home with our money while ours was about to be seized by the bank. I collapsed onto the kitchen floor, the cold tile a shock against my skin. I was surrounded by the beautiful, empty shell of my life. The walls I had designed, the cabinets I had chosen, the garden I had planted. All of it felt like a lie. I had hit the bottom, the concrete floor of the crisis. And as I lay there, with nothing left to lose, I realized something. When you're at the absolute bottom, there's nowhere to go but up. He thought he had taken everything, but he had left me with one thing, the truth. And the truth, I decided, was going to be my weapon. The turning point wasn't a bolt of lightning. It was a flicker of memory. I was packing a box of old things from the study, preparing for the inevitable eviction. My hand brushed against a framed photograph tucked away on a bookshelf. It was from the very beginning. Me and Mark, 25 years old, standing in the empty shell of our first office. We were kids, broke but deliriously happy. We were holding up a hand-painted sign that said, "Vance and Sterling." We looked so young, so full of a fierce, unstoppable belief in ourselves and each other. I looked at the woman in the photo. My hair was a mess, I had paint on my jeans, but my eyes were blazing with ambition. I wasn't Mark's wife in that picture. I wasn't his partner. I was Eleanor Sterling, a force of nature, a woman who could build empires from scratch. Where had she gone? I had let her disappear, subsumed by the role of Mrs. Vance. I had become the quiet, supportive half of a power couple, forgetting that I was a powerhouse all on my own. Mark hadn't just underestimated his wife. He had forgotten who he had married. He had forgotten the woman who had drafted their first business plan on the back of a napkin, the woman who had stared down bank managers and skeptical investors and refused to take no for an answer. He had forgotten that I was the architect of our success. And I had let him. That night, I didn't cry. I made a phone call. I didn't call a divorce lawyer. I called Arthur Peterson, the most ruthless corporate litigation and forensic accounting attorney in the city. A man known for eviscerating his opponents in the courtroom. We met the next day in his sterile, glass-walled office overlooking the city. I laid out everything. The printouts from the server. The bank statements. The incorporation documents for his shell company. I didn't cry. I didn't talk about my broken heart. I talked about breach of fiduciary duty, fraudulent conveyance, and corporate malfeasance. Peterson listened, his face impassive. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This isn't a divorce. This is a demolition. What is it, exactly, that you want?" I looked him straight in the eye, the fire from that old photograph burning in my chest. "I don't want half, Mr. Peterson," I said, my voice as cold and steady as steel. "I want it all. I want the company. I want the money he stole, and I want to make sure he can never, ever build anything again." The plan was a thing of beauty, a masterclass in legal warfare. Peterson and his team of forensic accountants worked in secret, tracing every dollar Mark had siphoned away. They built an ironclad case, a mountain of evidence so high it would be impossible to overcome. While they worked, I played my part. I became the broken, defeated wife. I moved out of the house and into a small, furnished apartment. I let Mark think he had won. He filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. His petition painted me as unstable and emotionally erratic. I didn't fight it. I let him have his narrative. He was getting cocky, sloppy. He and Chloe were flaunting their new life all over town, all over the internet. They were the city's new golden couple. He was giving interviews about his bold new vision for architecture, talking about his new firm, Vance Innovative Design Group, as if it had been his plan all along. He was erasing me from the story, and I let him, because I knew the final chapter was yet to be written, and I was the one holding the pen. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. A friend, one of the few who had quietly stuck by me, sent me a text. It was a screenshot from Chloe's Instagram. A picture of her hand, a massive diamond ring on her finger, intertwined with Mark's. The caption was nauseating. I said yes. I can't wait to spend forever with my soulmate, my king, my everything. Future Mrs. Vance. The ring, I knew from the documents Peterson had uncovered, had been purchased for $85,000 through his shell corporation. It wasn't a symbol of his love, it was evidence. Exhibit A. They were celebrating their future, and I decided it was time to send them my congratulations. This brings me back to the card. Sitting at the cheap particle board desk in my temporary apartment, the expensive Montblanc pen in my hand. It was perfect. Poetic, even. The symbol of the partnership he had given me would now be the instrument of his downfall. I wrote the note carefully. Chloe, it began, a touch of false familiarity. Heard the wonderful news. Congratulations on the engagement. A new life together is so exciting. As you're starting this new chapter, I thought you should have a copy of the prenuptial agreement you'll likely be signing. It's always best to be prepared. All the best, Eleanor. It was polite. Almost kind. The kind of note a gracious ex-wife might send. But the devil was in the enclosure. Behind the card, I placed the executive summary of the lawsuit. The first 15 pages, detailing the fraud, the embezzlement, and, most importantly, naming both Mark Vance and Chloe Becker as co-defendants, alleging her active participation and benefit from the conspiracy to defraud Vance and Sterling and its creditors. At the bottom of my note on the card, I added a little postscript. P.S. My attorney, Mr. Peterson, sends his regards as well, and right below it was Arthur Peterson's signature, embossed with his firm's official seal. I had him sign a dozen of them just for this occasion. I put it all in the creamy, expensive envelope. I didn't mail it. I wanted to control the timing of the delivery. I hired a bonded courier, the kind used for delivering sensitive legal documents, and gave him specific instructions. Deliver it to Chloe Becker at 7 p.m. on Friday night. Hand it to her personally. Do not leave it with a doorman. I knew they would be at home, getting ready for a celebratory dinner. I could picture the scene perfectly. The champagne would be chilling. She'd be getting dressed, giddy with excitement. The doorbell would ring. She'd be expecting flowers, a gift from a friend. And instead, she would be served. Served with the truth. The climax wasn't a screaming match in a courtroom. It was a silent, devastating implosion that I orchestrated from miles away. I sat in my quiet apartment, a glass of wine in my hand, and I imagined it all. The courier arriving at their gleaming new high-rise. Chloe, beautiful and radiant in a cocktail dress, opening the door. The polite exchange as she signs for the envelope. The flicker of confusion on her face as she sees my name. She would open it, her perfectly manicured nails tearing the seal. She'd see the congratulations card and probably smirk, thinking it was a pathetic, last-ditch effort from the jilted wife. Then she'd read my note. The smile would falter. She'd see the document behind it. Civil complaint, her brow would furrow. And then she would start to read. She would see her own name, over and over again. She would see the dates of wire transfers next to the dates of her lavish gifts. She would see the paper trail connecting her new handbag, her new apartment, her new life, directly to the millions of dollars stolen from my company. The blood would drain from her face. The champagne dreams would evaporate, replaced by the cold, hard reality of legal terminology. Conspiracy, aiding and abetting, asset forfeiture. She wasn't the princess in a fairy tale. She was an accomplice. The $85,000 ring on her finger wasn't a token of love. It was a piece of evidence that could be clawed back by a bankruptcy court. She would realize that the king who had rescued her from her ordinary life was actually a con man who had made her a pawn in his crime. And then I imagined her legs would give out. She would collapse, the legal papers scattering around her on the pristine hardwood floor of the apartment that was no longer hers. That was the moment Mark would walk in, whistling, ready for their celebration. He would find his beautiful young fiancée in a heap on the floor, hysterical, pointing a trembling finger at the papers. At my name. At the ruin I had just delivered to their doorstep. His midlife crisis had just collided with a corporate lawsuit. And his carefully constructed new beginning had just been served with an ending. The phone call came at 7:32 p.m. It was Mark. His voice was a strangled, unrecognizable sound, a mixture of panic and pure rage. "What did you do?" he screamed into the phone. "What the hell did you do, Eleanor?" I took a slow sip of my wine. "I'm not sure what you mean, Mark," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "I just sent your fiancé a congratulations card. Is there a problem?" He was sputtering, incoherent. "The lawsuit. The lies. You're trying to ruin me." "No, Mark," I said, the ice in my voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You already ruined yourself. I'm just here to handle the demolition and clean up the mess. My lawyer will be in touch with yours. Don't contact me again." I hung up the phone. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. But the real twist, the move that turned this from a simple revenge plot into a complete and total victory, came from a clause I had written into our company's founding documents 15 years earlier. Peterson found it on page 57 of our partnership agreement. Mark had always called it my paranoid paperwork. It was a bespoke malfeasance clause. I had worried about a hostile takeover or an unscrupulous future partner. I never dreamed it would be the man sleeping next to me. The clause stated that if one managing partner was found to have committed willful financial misconduct or fraud against the company, their shares would be automatically forfeited and transferred to the other partner.
Non negoziable.
He hadn't just been stealing from our company. According to the rules that I wrote and he signed, he had been stealing from me. When he created his shell corporation, Vance Innovative Design Group, He had funded it entirely with money fraudulently taken from Vance and Sterling. Therefore, Peterson argued, his new company wasn't a new company at all. It was a subsidiary asset of the original firm, purchased with stolen funds. In trying to build his own escape raft, Mark had inadvertently built a new wing onto my ship. He thought he was starting a new life. In reality, he was just pre-funding my company's expansion. The look on his face in the deposition when his own lawyer explained it to him was something I will treasure for the rest of my life. It was the face of a man who had been outplayed in a game he didn't even know he was losing.
He was checkmated.
He hadn't just lost the war. He discovered he had been fighting for my side all along. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Faced with an insurmountable mountain of evidence and the threat of criminal charges, Mark capitulated completely. He signed everything. The divorce papers, the transfer of assets, the house, the cars, everything. He was left with nothing but crippling personal debt and a tarnished reputation. The story of his spectacular downfall became the stuff of industry legend. Vance Innovative Design Group was absorbed into the parent company. I rebranded. The name Vance and Sterling was dead to me. The new firm was simply Sterling Architecture. Chloe, facing her own legal troubles and public humiliation, left him. Her testimony against him in exchange for immunity was the final nail in his professional coffin. I heard she moved back to Ohio to live with her parents, her Instagram account deleted, her 15 minutes of fame over. I never saw either of them again. I didn't sell the house. I had it exorcised. I hired a team to come in and strip it down to the studs. Every piece of furniture he had chosen, every paint color he had liked, it was all torn out. I redesigned it from the ground up, making it entirely my own. It's lighter now, more open, filled with art and books and the comfortable, happy silence of solitude. The two German shepherds, who had always been more mine anyway, are usually asleep at my feet. The firm, my firm, is more successful than ever. I cut away the dead weight, the vanity projects, and focused on the smart, innovative work I had always wanted to do. I hired a new generation of brilliant young architects, mostly women, and I pay them what they're worth. I'm tougher now, less willing to compromise, less trusting. Some might say I'm cold. I say I'm fortified. The cracks in my foundation have been filled with steel. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on my new wraparound porch, looking out at the city skyline, at the buildings that I helped create. I think about the life I lost, the man I loved, the 20 years that now feel like a dream. There's a sadness there, a phantom limb that aches when the weather changes. I didn't want this victory. I didn't want this war. I wanted the life we had built together. But he set the fire, and I had a choice: burn with it, or walk out of the flames reborn. He called it a midlife crisis, a phase. But for me, it was a crucible. It burned away the parts of me that were weak, the parts that were willing to shrink to make someone else feel big. It forged me into the woman I was always meant to be. I am alone, but I am not lonely. I am Eleanor Sterling, and I am the architect of my own life. He called it a midlife crisis. I call it the moment I got my life back. Thank you for being here, for listening to the whole story. It means a great deal. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life, and I'm grateful for every single one of you.